for me.
Oh, wow. Well, in
And
any case, you've got a lot of experience.
yeah, Robert actually, I believe, started in 1967.
Yeah,
And
that's correct.
and he's actually younger than me, so he's got to jump on me both ways.
Okay. Basically, Stuart's going to be talking about how you acquire bees, installing a package, and package bee management. So we're running about 15 minutes late, so we'll just go right into your presentation. Stuart, take it away.
Oh, okay. So thank you, Phil. This is my wife, Nita. She originally helped me with this presentation, but I'm on my own today. But anyway, that's what she looks like for those of you that have never met her. I think I do a lot better job when she's helping me, but unfortunately, without her being available, you're stuck with me. So anyway, some of you may already be familiar with package bees. I know Robert is selling hundreds and hundreds of these this spring. Robert Hughes, as well as there's several other local sources, but they're bees that are shaken from established colonies, and each of them have a newly mated queen that's in a separate little cage that's suspended from the very top of the package, along with a can of sugar syrup to feed them while they're in transit and before they get installed in the hive. And they're either shipped or brought in from the southern or western US. And I know that Robert, I believe he's got a couple of pickup dates, I think March 31st and April 17th. And he actually goes and picks up the bees, and that way they don't have to endure the trials of the shipping through the USPS or US or UPS. So I know what he sells comes through in real good shape. Whoops, jumped ahead on that one. Okay, so here's some of the advantages and disadvantages of package bees. Nice thing is you can acquire them early, and so you may be able to get surplus honey the first year. You're usually getting known genetics with them. You can order them with a marked queen or marked and clipped queen, which of course when the queen's wings on one side are clipped, she can't fly off. So that gives you a little bit of temporary control if they try to swarm on you, which usually would take place the second year. Very low risk of acquiring American foul brood, which is Kyle Day will be talking about that this afternoon, but that's one of the very actually the very worst disease as far as I'm concerned, because it contaminates the equipment. Once your combs are contaminated, the only way that you can sterilize them is through gamma radiation, which we don't really have a facility like that nearby. I think they do in a couple of the eastern states. But anyway, you can also start with brand new equipment, and you know what you're getting. You know you have high quality equipment that's easy to work with right from the start. The disadvantages are you can get low quality bees that are susceptible to varroa, which usually come from colonies that are chemically treated. So you know, it can be a case of where mite susceptible stock is being propagated, but of course that's just kind of reality in the beekeeping world these days, because probably 95% of the bees out there that are available commercially are going to fit that category, and you have to really stay on top of them with the varroa treatment. It's possible that you can get poorly mated queens. That usually isn't you know, intentionally on the part of the breeder that's trying to sell bad queens, but sometimes the weather doesn't cooperate, especially in the south, and the queens may only get partially mated, but usually that's not too big of a problem. And if it is, like I've seen a couple cases where a few years ago a friend got some packages from a place, and one of them had a drone laying queen, and it was just a matter of them sending a new queen, which they did right away, and just killing off the drone layer one and installing the new one. Of course, again, this is somewhat controversial, may not be well suited for local conditions. I'm not really sure how big of an issue that is. There's just so many variables in beekeeping. Um, most of the time the bees you get in from the south are very well adapted from this area, so I don't think that's a huge concern. And if it is, it's always easy to requeen at some point in the future with some locally mated queens or locally raised queens that several people have available. And again, one of the disadvantages when they're shipped through UPS or the Postal Service is they can get damaged or overheated in shipping with heavy losses. A few years ago, a friend of mine that was getting 3 packages from Texas, they came through UPS. And ironically, he used to work for UPS himself, but they notified him that they came in, and luckily he went right away to get them. And they had put the packages of bees in a sealed plastic bag, which of course they would have suffocated very quickly if he hadn't got there as soon as he did. Apparently someone there at the UPS shipping terminal was afraid of him and thought that would be a smart thing to do, but see all kinds of crazy things that can happen. Typically, the United States Post Office has a really good history of handling package bees, but sometimes things happen like, they can get damaged, and you hear stories about bees getting loose in the facility and all kinds of things. The other thing is they're expensive. These prices are a little bit out of date. Um, I've seen 3-pound packages of bees. I think the highest I've seen this year is $225. Back when I got started in beekeeping and was buying packages in the mid 70s, they were about $20 for a 3-pound package of queen, along with the queen. And just a few years before that, you could have bought a 3-pound package of bees in the early 70s for around $7 or $8 with the queen. So it just gives you an idea, just like everything else, how prices have escalated. Okay, so a nuke, of course, is short for a nucleus colony. I've seen some people spell it Nuke, and this is actually the less explosive kind. But if you get a good one, they do explode very quickly in population, get a good queen. And this just shows some examples of how you can get them. The one in the upper left is in a wooden nuke box, which some people sell. The one on the right is in one of the Jester's corrugated plastic easy nukes, which are very convenient to make nukes in, and very lightweight and easy to transport. They already have ventilation holes in them. You can see there's a little entrance tab here that can be closed easily. And sometimes you get a situation where you get one of these nuke boxes that doesn't completely seal, or say, for example, it's a hot day when you're picking them up and there's a bunch of them clustered on the outside, and you can smoke them and usually they go in, but there's still sometimes a lot of bees on the outside. So to better handle them, sometimes what you can do is get one of those net laundry bags and put around them, and then that'll give them better ventilation and less chance of overheating, and also capture virtually all the loose bees on the outside. That works really well. Like I say, if the weather's warmer, sometimes the nuke supplier will do that for you, or if you want to be prepared and and tell him he doesn't have to, him or her, whoever's supplying the nukes to you, you want to tell them they don't have to completely, to just wait until you get there. Hopefully, maybe it would be close to evening when most of the bees would be in. You can just take one of those laundry bags with you and put that over them right on the spot. The lower left shows what would be a good comb of brood and with a ring of honey around it. Normally, your nuke would consist of 5 frames altogether, and usually you'd have 3 of them that are somewhat equivalent to this comb. The other 2 would be a mixture of honey and nectar and pollen. Okay, any questions at this point? Okay, go ahead and move to the next slide. Nice thing about nukes is that they have a laying queen, brood in all stages, and emerging bees, so it's easy to see what you're getting right off the bat. They've already got a jump start on a package of bees because they have built up comb and you've already got a laying queen started, and you've got brood in various stages of development. Although I have seen situations where package bees on new foundation have completely outstripped nukes as well. It all depends on the quality of the nuke that you get, and the quality, and of course that's 90% of that is the quality of the queen for future stock that or future bees that will be emerging. And of course, there again, that this is controversial. Some people think local stock is better. Some say it doesn't really matter. But it is possible that if you get local stock that has comes from colonies that have survived several winters without treatment, may be more winter hardy and mite resistant. And if you have at least 3 good frames of brood, which you should have, population may soon rival that of a package. And typically that would be the case, not always. And then you have drawn combs with honey or pollen in them. Very easy to transfer from a standard hive. The disadvantages, again, anytime you have combs, you deal with old combs with equipment, you have a greater risk of acquiring American foul brood. Although anybody that is a reputable nuke seller will not intentionally sell you diseased bees. There's a risk of junk combs or poorly assembled frames. Usually you'll be getting combs that are older. A lot of people like to replace, the best practice now is to replace your combs after 3 or 4 years. I personally don't do that if they're good. I use them for a long time. And again, could be poor overall quality, maybe a poor population or a small amount of brood. This does happen, but anybody that I know of around here that sells nukes, and I know Matt Winstead and several others, Paul Landsberg, Christine with the Kansas Bee Company, they all sell quality nukes, and Matt supplies several places, and Christine is one of those. And if something isn't right, they'll always make it right with you. Okay, so the other method you can use, of course, is buying established colonies. And there again, this is a mixed bag, but if you get good colonies and good equipment, in the spring is the ideal time to buy them, probably March time frame, when you've got good enough weather where you can get in and take a look at them and see how they're doing and see what you're actually getting. And sometimes you can actually get several nucleus colonies out of a good overwintered hive that you've bought. So get them at the right price, it can be a good way to acquire bees. Again, with established colonies, the advantages usually have more bees in brood than with nukes or packages. And as I just mentioned, you can divide it into several nukes sometimes if it's a very strong colony. Give you an example, back in 1980 or 1975, that was a couple years after I got started, and I had a friend, Dave Boyden, over in Topeka, and he actually gave me a call one day and said, "Boy," said, "I bought 5 hives from a beekeeper over in Highland Park on the east side of town." And he said, "I'm really excited about it." And he said, "They're really, really heavy." And said the guy only charged me $25 a hive for them. And I was thinking, oh man, that was cheap even back then. That was about half the price of what you would normally expect to pay back in the mid 70s. And I'm thinking, oh, I just wonder what he ended up with. But he said, oh yeah, I'd like you to come and take a look at them with me. And so I did. And oh man, talk about a bargain. They were each 2 stories and a medium still. And again, this is in early April of the year. He'd had them for about a week or 2 at that point when we went through them, just packed with brood. Every last one of them was strong, just optimum shape, really good equipment. Like I say, that you couldn't really beat a bargain like that. So sometimes you can, I don't know today if there's many of those bargains available, as popular as beekeeping is, but that was sure neat to see what he got back then. Again, that may be more mite resistant survivor stock, depending on what the history of the hives has been with the person that owned them. And of course, the equipment is typically assembled and painted, drawn combs with honey and pollen, much greater chance of surplus honey the first year. Again, the disadvantages, once again, is that, even as little as you see today of AFB, it can still be there. And if you get equipment and bees that are diseased with that, typically you would need to destroy the bees and burn the combs and frames, and then the outer equipment can be salvaged by scraping it real good and using a blowtorch to sterilize the char out and sterilize the interior of the equipment. But it's one of those things, if you have any doubt, to have somebody that actually is familiar with that to go look at the bees with you before you buy them. And again, you see everything under the sun. You see everything from good equipment to good combs to junk combs, poorly assembled frames. Sometimes, they were framed or assembled with nails that are too short without the side nail that Robert probably talked about earlier. And you get top bars that pull off and frames that fall apart. Maybe overall poor quality. Rotting wood is not uncommon at all. May require a lot of work to clean propolis and burr comb for easy colony examination. If it's some that have been sitting for years, that I've seen a lot of that too. It can really be a big job to get them in workable condition again. And it doesn't give the opportunity to see a colony, for you as a starting beekeeper to see a colony starting from the ground up. But you can always do that later, or get a swarm, and so that's not really a huge disadvantage. And it's more work to move the hive to a new location, but again, well worth it if you get a good enough deal. And then, of course, I think anybody that's caught a swarm, this is probably pretty much the favorite way of collecting bees, because it's so easy. And of course, what a swarm is, it results from natural instinct that bees have to fly from or to divide their population to start new colonies so that they can maintain the species. And, if it wasn't for the swarming instinct, why the beekeeping population would be entirely dependent on the beekeeping industry itself to divide colonies, which of course a lot of that happens too. But just from a very uh, natural perspective, swarming is absolutely necessary. And of course, the old queen will leave with approximately half of the population once the parent colony gets to the point where they're plugged up with bees and resources, and they just feel like it's a good time to move on. And in this area, anytime from early April until late June is the primary swarming period. It seems like anymore it's concentrated mostly in the month of May. Here you have a couple of examples. The one on the left is pretty typical when the population of bees leaves the hive, usually within 50 feet to 50 yards. They find a tree or another object to land on. One on the right is from a guy's backyard in Kansas City, Missouri. That was actually Nita's first swarm that she captured here a few years ago, and they landed on the back of a bench in his backyard. And those are easy to get. The way I like to do them is those cardboard trays that come from Culver's or Hardee's. Real easy, since that cardboard that they're made of is so thin. You can just gently scoop them into those. I don't like to use my hands or my gloves because it's too awkward. And sometimes you pinch bees and they end up stinging and getting killed. And that cardboard tray scoop works really, really well in a situation like that. Sometimes same way, they'll be on the trunk of a tree or spread out over a wall. Maybe it's a brick wall or side of a house. Occasionally you see that. Okay, so advantages of swarms: free except for the time and travel involved. They're all full of honey typically, especially if they've only been there, a few hours or less. Very low risk of transmission of American foul brood. Again, possibility of getting some hardy local survivor stock. Some of them will be from established hives that people have started up, and maybe they've been established for a year or two, but the bees have commercial origins, in which case they're going to be pretty similar to what you'd get in a package of bees. The disadvantages, again, sometimes not available until May or June. If we have an early year, you can get them in early April, but it's really not completely predictable. It may not be early enough to store surplus honey, although a good swarm, it's amazing how quickly they will develop at first and how fast they'll build out combs because they're all primed with new wax, and just seems like they're full of energy and ready to get going. So they can actually, sometimes actually develop quicker than a package. May have an old queen, and sometimes you'll have a queen that's say 2, 3, 4 years old in a swarm. That's her better days are behind her. You sometimes have unknown genetics, or oftentimes, unless you happen to know where the swarm came from, may abscond from the hive without certain precautions, but that's really easy to overcome. That's a whole different topic, but it's pretty easy to guarantee that a swarm will not leave your hive if you are careful about a few things. And if you really want to be prepared for removing every swarm every hard to get place that they end up at. Um, it's good to be prepared with a variety of equipment and retrieval tools. Whoops. Okay, so so when say that you're on a swarm list, somebody calls and says, I've got a swarm of bees I want you to get. Here's some questions you can ask. You want to find out if they're really honeybees, because especially later in the summer, they're often yellow jackets or hornets. So if possible, have them send you a photo, and that'll tell you for sure if they're really honeybees or not. Of course, you want to get the name, address, and phone number of the person calling, directions to the swarm on the property. Ask them how long it's been there. Sometimes if it's been there a couple days ago, or longer, and the weather's been bad, you may want to be prepared with more protective clothing, because in that case they may be low on honey and they may be more defensive, although typically they're very gentle to handle in a swarm. If they've been sprayed with insecticide, this is really important. Hopefully people are honest with you about this, because a couple times we've dealt with people that haven't been truthful. You get there and most of the bees are dead and dying on the ground, and you say, what on earth happened? And you look the person in the eye and you say, did you spray these with insecticide? Well, yeah, I just sprayed them with a little, but didn't know it would hurt them that bad. Well, if you can get people to admit that they've sprayed them, don't even mess with them. It's not worth it. Tell them the next time they have a swarm, if they're going to call a beekeeper, don't spray them. So again, how high off the ground are they? A lot of swarms are accommodating, will be head height or lower, easy to reach, but sometimes they're up, 15, 30, 40, 50 feet in a tree, and it takes specialty equipment to get them in some cases. Might ask them how big it is, and if the swarm is on a small tree branch, can the branch be cut? Sometimes that's really convenient. You can just cut the branch off and put it in your container and be real gentle. Don't jar the bees, and that way you don't have to shake them, and it's a real quick way to get them. Here's some different examples of methods of swarm capture. The upper left hand shows Nita getting a swarm a few years back that she got a call about. And I think since we've been married, she's actually captured more swarms than I have. The middle top picture shows one way of getting a swarm that's, I've got them up to 30 feet or higher using this method, but just a pole with a bucket on the end, and just jar the bees on the end of the branch with that. If it's a small enough branch, if it's a larger branch, it makes it more difficult because the branch won't easily shake. But I've got an old wooden pole saw that has a hook on the end of it, and I have a bucket attached underneath it with some holes drilled in it and attached to the pole with a couple of U-bolts. That works really well because you can hook that hook up over the limb, give them, a good stiff shake or jar. And if you get it positioned right, most of the bees will fall in the bucket, just like what you see underneath there once it's been the photo directly below it. And of course, a lot of the bees will go airborne. But if you get the majority of them, especially if you get the queen in there, the other bees will accumulate around the bucket in a few minutes, and you can lower the whole thing down. In the past, I've had a more elaborate device that does this a lot easier. Call it the swarm elevator, but I no longer have that, and my plan is to build another one. The lower left shows one that I got a few years ago. It was about a a 5-pound swarm, which is the most bees I'd want to put in one of those easy nukes, but that shows it open. And what I would do before I close it is on the lid that's also covered with bees, I'd first of all, I'd lift the lid up to where it's parallel with the side of the nuke box, gently brush the bees down in it, and then gently close the lid before I transport them. And then obviously the little entrance would be closed as well. On the right is an interesting photo of a beekeeper that back in his younger years. I think this one was taken sometime in the 1940s that he shared with me. And I actually, originally I thought it was a more recent photo from 1974 when I met him at Harvey Moeller up in Nortonville, Kansas, and turned out that this was back, I think he said 1947 rather than 1974. So what he did here was this was it looks like probably a good 8 pounds, maybe 7, 8 pounds of bees. And he actually had gotten a frame of brood. This was not in his yard, it was from a neighbor a few miles away. But he got a frame of unsealed brood that he removed from one of his hives, tied a rope around it, and then to the other end of the rope, he tied a weight and threw it over the tree limb. And then what he did was he hoisted the frame of unsealed brood right up next to the swarm. And within a half hour, 45 minutes, the bees had all accumulated on that frame of unsealed brood. And then he lowered them down and put them in the hive. So worked pretty slick. I've done that myself a few times, and it really does work well. It would have been fun to see him doing it the first time. You can also transfer established colonies that are in buildings, houses. This is a horse barn actually that Nita and I got 3 colonies out of back a few years ago. It's the most labor intensive, and people have BVACs that if they're built right, they work really well. And all the details of how this is done, of course, is a topic for another presentation. But it's my least favorite method, simply because it's so much work for what you get. And really, unless you just want the educational value when you're first starting out, you're well within your rights, I think, to charge, for your time for removing these, because sometimes something happens to the queen, and bees in this situation, the value of them is highly variable and just a tremendous amount of work involved. I know Matt Winstead, Todd Prater, and others have made a business out of removing established colonies, and sometimes they'll do 100 or more of these a year in all kinds of situations. So again, advantages and disadvantages for established colonies is a good chance of acquiring local survivor stock, may be more winter hardy and mite resistant, especially if the colony's been established for several years. Basically, any advantage would be the same as with a local swarm, if in fact the swarm comes from a hive that's been established for a long time. But as I already mentioned, typically a lot of work, sometimes very difficult to access without doing some major removal of construction materials, sometimes difficult to find and recover the queen. Requires a great deal of equipment and tools to be prepared for all situations. And oftentimes the bees are more aggressive than they are with a swarm because they've got a colony to establish. Okay, so have a video. Unfortunately, this isn't a newer one. It's from about 6 years ago that several people have already seen, I'm sure, multiple times. But at this point, is there any questions? Let's see, excuse me. Can everybody still hear me okay?
We can hear you good, Stuart. Yes.
Okay, okay. So I will go ahead and start this video. It's about a 15-minute video, but I think like I did before, it shows installing 2 different packages. I think I'll just show the first one because there's probably not a lot of value in showing the last one. But again, this is only one method of installing packages. A popular way for people to do it is not even shake the bees out of the package like I show here, just to set the package down inside the hive in a space made by removing 4 or 5 of the frames. That works pretty good too. I still prefer shaking them. So anyway, I'll get this started.
Allison, come over here, babe. Okay.
Okay, we are going to install a couple of packages of bees.
Hey, Stuart. You're
Yes.
still just sharing your presentation. You're not sharing your video. So
Pardon me?
you're just sharing the presentation still. You're not sharing your video. So I think if you want to share the video, you'll need to.
Oh, yeah, you're right. It's just a second here. It got paused. The screen share got paused. Okay. Should be able to see it now, right?
Yep, we got it.
First thing, I just want to point out something. We have our single story hive set up here. These happen to have. Start over.
Allison, come over here, babe. Okay.
Okay, we are going to install a couple of packages of bees. Our good friend John Phillips here. Get started in the bee business. So first thing, I just want to point out something. We have our single story hive set up here. These happen to have screen bottom boards that we don't have the inserts for right now, and it's a little bit windy and chilly right now. Might be a little bit too chilly with an open screen for the bees starting out, so we just kind of temporarily put a couple pieces of cardboard down here to keep the wind off of them. The other thing I want to point out is that I don't know if anybody else that does it this way, but I like to use a spacer rim on the bottom board, and that way when the bees are shaken down into the hive, it gives them plenty of space because they're going to fall in a big clump. If you don't have that, it takes a while for them to crawl up onto the frames, and then they're going to, there's a possibility of some of them getting crushed, but it just takes a lot longer for them to allow them to crawl up. So the first thing I'm going to do, I think I'm going to take one more frame out of here temporarily. This is the package of bees. Came with a can of syrup. Go ahead and shake the rest of the bees off of there. This syrup can was virtually empty. There's just a few drops in there. So I think these have been caged probably about 2 days ago. First thing we do, take the queen cage out. This is a California mini queen cage, and what we've done is we've taken a plastic tube, put some candy in it that's made out of powdered sugar and just a little bit of water, and that way bees can release. We could probably
directly release the queen without any danger at this point, because she's probably been with the bees for, at least a few days. But since there's no attendant bees in the cage, we don't have to worry about which direction the candy's pointing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take this nail, wrap this tab around there. We use that for support. Just spin that, put a couple of these frames like this. Okay. Next thing we want to do is I'm going to jar the bees down over the hive. We've already squirted them with a little bit of sugar syrup. We don't want to get them too wet because today it's only about 50 degrees and it's breezy. We don't want them to get too chilled, but we also want them to have plenty of honey. So anyway, jar these down, get them in a good wad, shake a few more over the queen, and then try to get every last bee out of this package if possible. It's warm weather, probably 70 degrees or more. I'd wet them down with cold water. A lot easier to get them all out at one shot. A little bit sticky from the syrup. That's okay. Okay, so if you could zoom in here a little bit, come in and get a shot of the bees. You can see how they're in a big wad. And so having this spacer rim gives them plenty of room, and then we don't actually have to wait for them to crawl. Get away from them real quick. Want to slide the queen into the center, and then put our frames in. Rest of them will crawl up too long. Join the queen. So we got our complement of 10 of these all plastic frames. Another thing that's real important every time you get done with working the bees, you want to crowd all your frames into the center. And then that way you've always got plenty of room to get that first one out. You can keep all your tin combs and brood nets. Next thing we do, put the inner cover on. We've already filled this gallon pail with sugar syrup that's got about 20 holes or so punched in the lid. Just put that right over the top here. We'll lose a little bit to begin with, but the bees will actually clean that up. Let's see. Make sure we're good here. Okay, yeah, they've got plenty of room to get up under there and get that syrup. Oh, we could put that on. I don't think you need it today. Let's see. I guess we went ahead and got some of these protein supplement patties. Not necessary to put them on, but might help. So we'll just slip that right in there. Let's see. That should fit pretty tight. Let's put the hot body here to take up the space. Guess we got our brick to put on top. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing with this one here.
Okay. Okay, so can everybody still hear me okay?
Yeah, we got you, Stuart.
Okay. So anyway, as far as following up from the package installation, it's probably best to not disturb them for a full week after you install them. And one thing I didn't mention in the video is, sometimes you'll get them, well, I think I did touch on it. Sometimes they come with a California mini queen cage or another type of queen cage that doesn't have candy in it. So you either have to directly release the queen, which I don't prefer, or make preparation for it with your own candy tube and candy like I showed in that video. But anyway, with a nuke, making up a nuke or a package, either one, I prefer to wait for a full week. Some people say go back in 2 or 3 days and check. It's probably going to be okay a lot of the time, but there's always a risk that if you disturb the bees too soon after a new queen is introduced, that the bees will form a tight ball around her and kill her or injure her. So it's just not worth the risk in my mind. I'd wait for a warm sunny day at least a week after you install them. And then the things that you want to check for is the queen released. So if the queen cage candy is all consumed and you may see a few worker bees that are crawling in the cage, but if that pathway is free, she's at least been released. You can remove the queen cage, check for eggs. You may at this point even have eggs that have hatched out into very small larvae. You don't actually have to find the queen. As long as you see that there's eggs, you know that she's probably alive and well. Refill the feeder with sugar syrup. And then the bees should be drawing their comb well. A 3-pound package should have about 3 or 4 combs at least partially drawn and filled with sugar syrup and nectar and pollen at the end of a week. And, if it's a nice day, and I'm assuming this is probably sometime in early to mid-April when you're checking them initially, or it's later, at any of those times, they should be collecting and storing pollen. In the video you saw where Don Phillips had already bought some of those pollen substitute patties, which again, that's fine too. The only thing you have to be careful about with a package of bees with a small population like that is that can be an open invitation for hive beetles to feed on that pollen supplement, since the hive is not have a large population yet. So again, it's not necessarily a bad thing to do. If the weather's bad, it could really help them get started. I've never done that myself. So here's what eggs will look like on the left. This is the reason a lot of people prefer the black comb foundation. is because you can see how well the eggs show up, kind of look like miniature rice grains. Again, I don't necessarily prefer the black foundation myself because, once you get a cycle or two of brood in it, the comb will start to turn brown and the eggs are easy to see anyway. But for somebody just starting out, I can see the value of having the black to be able to see the eggs on. By comparison, you have a comb built from regular wax foundation here on the right. You can still see the eggs, but at actual size, some people have a very difficult time being able to see those eggs with the natural colored comb. So anyway, this is after a week, if the weather's been decent, especially, you should see similar to what you're seeing in the left photo, with the exception of up in the upper left here, you have some sealed cells of brood. You won't have that yet at a week, but you will see pollen. If the bees if it's a normal situation, the bees have been out collecting pollen. You'll see this pollen, orange and yellow and other colors stored. And then on the right is what brood looks like in a new comb. The cappings are pretty light tan yet. And after about 2 weeks is when you'll start to typically see pretty good patches of sealed brood like that. So check the bees at weekly intervals and make sure to keep the syrup feeder full. Remember, the population in a package will be at its lowest ebb just after 3 weeks of installing the package, because it takes roughly about 3 weeks for a worker bee to develop from an egg into an adult. And so during that first 3 weeks, you've had some of the older bees dying off and no new ones emerging to replace them. So after about 4 weeks, the population typically starts to become larger than the initial number of bees in the package. And usually 3,500 bees is about what an average number is considered to be for a pound. So in a package of bees, you'll typically be getting over 10,000 bees, maybe up to 12,000. A lot of times, with the package people that sell package bees, they'll shake extras in to make up for losses. So sometimes you may get 3.5 pounds. So after about 5 weeks, the bees should have about, and again, I'm talking just on average, but if the queen is doing well, if you've got good healthy bees in the package, if you've been feeding them steadily, they'll typically have about 7 combs built out and at least partially full of brood pollen and syrup or nectar, which by that time they've probably been collecting nectar from the field as well. And this is the time to add the second brood chamber. You want to keep on feeding sugar syrup, probably 2 to 1, even in the spring. I typically don't, in a situation like this, ever feed the thin syrup, because by that time they've got access to water. You want to make sure that you're giving them as much sugar as possible, even though they say, the 1-to-1 syrup or thinner syrup does more to stimulate brood rearing. I don't know that that's necessarily true, or if it's just a theory, but my objective is always to get as much sugar in the mixture as possible. And then let's see here. So they should have, the top of my slide got cut off here, but they should have roughly about at least 4 to 5 combs partially drawn and filled within 2 weeks of adding the second hive body. Again, that's assuming that you don't let them run out of syrup and you keep feeding them. So as soon as, and it may be another week or so before they have 5 or 6 combs in the top hive body drawn and filled. And again, this is probably, you know, maybe 2 to 3 weeks after you've added the second hive body. It could be sooner. But remove, assuming you've still got 2 or 3 down in the bottom hive body that aren't completely drawn and filled. What you want to do is remove those, move the fullest ones down to the bottom hive body, and consolidate all your brood into the center. Don't put any combs at this point in between 2 brood combs that doesn't have brood, because at this point you want the bees to be able to be the most efficient they can at keeping the brood warm. So you don't want to divide it up until they get a lot stronger. So the idea is, by putting the most completed combs in the bottom hive body, that gets them to that makes sure that everything gets filled out properly. Because like I've seen a lot of times, if people don't rearrange the combs like that, you know, sometimes they get the second hive body pretty well finished, but they tend to leave those 2 or 3 along the sides and the bottom untouched, or just partially built out with comb. And you want to encourage the bees to get all those finished. Again, just like I showed in the video, remember to always crowd the frames in toward the center of the hive body when you complete each examination, and that way it prevents the propolis buildup on the end bars from getting as bad, and gives you plenty of room for being able to move that first frame out of the way when you do your examinations. And then when 8 combs in the top hive body are nearly completed, add your first super and start feeding. And probably, you know, say for example, you install your package about the 1st of April. I'd say on average, this would probably be the 1st or 2nd week, maybe the middle of May, when you'd see this. And again, the combs that aren't completed, that'll be off to the sides in the center of in the second hive body, you want to remove them in toward the center to encourage the bees to complete them. And well, I'm at the end, I guess. Let's see. Yeah, what I intended to add on this last one is at that point, you know, when you add your super, you might use an excluder, but a lot of times the bees, if you've got the wax coated plastic foundation, they're not always eager to go up through the excluder. You know, it's going to vary a lot. But it's nice if you don't have the queen laying eggs in that first super. Some people like to use all medium hive bodies because of the weight for brood and for supers both. And if you do that, or if you use, say the first, say you're using deeps, and the very first super you put on is a deep, so in which case you'd have a 3-story colony. Then if you don't want to use an excluder and the queen goes up and lays eggs in some of those combs as they build them, you can always use those for brood combs later on. But the one thing you don't want to do is mix in the combs that they've built out that are going to be partially filled with supers, or sugar syrup, into your super, where it could potentially get extracted and mixed in with honey. So anyway, that's intended to be just kind of a broad overview. There's lots of other details that could be added, lots of different ways to look at it. And again, the time frame I've given is just kind of based on average weather, average performance of a package. Some of them can develop quicker, some of them may not develop that quickly, depending on, again, a lot of variables. The other thing is that I would, especially if you're installing multiple packages, I would wait until evening, just before dark, to install them. And that way, if it's good flying weather, you don't have a bunch of them drift into one of the hives. I've heard of that happening sometimes with people. Also, if it's even, say, if the temperature's in the 40s, go ahead and install them. Don't wait. You just have to be quick. Make sure the queen doesn't get chilled. But some commercial beekeepers that used to buy a lot of package bees when that was a popular way to start hives in the spring. It could be in the 20s with 2 feet of snow on the ground, and they would still install their bees. So actually, if it's in the 40s or maybe 50 degrees or below, that's an ideal temperature to install package bees at. So anyway, I think that's it.
Thank you, Stuart. Very good presentation as always. And probably it will raise more questions than answers.
Yeah.
So there were some questions asked and on the chat thing, they've been answered already.
Okay, good.
I think we're in pretty good shape there.
Good.
Unless somebody has any other questions, we will have a question and answer session at the end of the presentation day, so we can have